You know, during World War II, the air war over Europe was just a brutal, brutal numbers game. But what happens when the very rule book you're supposed to follow is actually getting you and your friends killed? Well, this is the incredible story of one man, a single-tail gunner, who saw a fatal flaw in the system and decided to write his own rules, changing air combat forever.
Just try to imagine this for a second. You're sealed inside a tiny plexiglass bubble at the very back of a B-17 bomber. You're miles away from the rest of your crew, it feels like. It's 60 degrees below zero, you're at 25,000 feet, and it's just you, your two machine guns, and what feels like the entire German Air Force coming right at you. That was the job. That was the reality for a tail gun.
And it was an absolutely deadly reality. I mean, get this. In the summer of 1943, the average B-17 crew was shot down after just 11 missions. 11. And for the tail gunners, the guys who took that first hit from any attack from the rear, the odds were even worse. It was basically a death sentence.
But then there was Staff Sergeant Michael Arsyrath. He was a 24-year-old gunner, and he looked at those insane odds, and he just refused to accept them. He had a gut feeling that the official training manual was dead wrong, and he was willing to bet his life and his crew's lives on it.
Okay, so what was the problem? Well, the core of it was just simple, deadly geometry. See, German fighter pilots figured out really quickly that the best way to attack a B-17 was from directly behind. And, incredibly, the U.S. Air Force's own training manual was pretty much helping him do it.
Here's the contradiction, and it's a deadly one. The manual preached patience. It told gunners, conserve your ammunition. Don't fire until they're within 300 yards. But the reality? The German pilots weren't playing by those rules. They'd open up from 600 yards out, shredding the bombers before the American gunners were even allowed to pull the trigger.
And for Arth, this wasn't some abstract theory. On his sixth mission, he literally watched it happen. A B-17 flying right next to him got hit hard from the rear, and the tail gunner, following the rules just like he was taught, never fired a single round. That was it. That was the moment Arth knew something had to change. To hell with doctrine, this was about survival.
So, Arth came up with a new theory. It was simple, it was radical, and, yeah, it was completely against regulations. He called it disruptive fire. And here's the genius of it. The goal wasn't to shoot down the enemy fighter on that first pass, not necessarily. The real goal was to make the German pilot think he was about to get shot down, to fill the air in front of him with so much lead that he's forced to break off his attack to spoil his own aim before he can ever get a clean shot at the bomber. So his method was this aggressive three-step dance. First, open fire way earlier than anyone thought you should, like 800 yards out. Second, you make that pilot react. You force him to dodge and weave. And third, by doing that, you completely ruin his aim. He can't get a stable shot off. Survival wasn't about getting a kill, it was about causing chaos. Of course, at first, nobody believed him. His superiors thought he was just wasting precious ammunition, other gunners thought he was being reckless, and you gotta remember, every time he opened up that early, he wasn't just gambling with his own life. He was gambling with the lives of the 9 other men on his bomber, the Tondileo.
Well, Arth's radical idea wasn't going to stay a theory for very long. It was about to get tested in 2 of the most brutal air battles of the entire war. This is where the rubber meets the road.
First up, a mission to Kassel. The American fighter escorts had to turn back, and suddenly the bombers were all alone. For 47 straight, non-stop minutes, German fighters swarmed them. And Arth, back in his lonely tail position, just put his theory into practice, firing at absolutely everything that came into his sights. He burned through 737 rounds of ammunition. Now, to put that in perspective, the manual said 800 rounds should last an entire mission. Arth used almost that much in a single fight. But it was working. He was forcing the enemy to break off, disrupting their attacks, and keeping his bomber in the air.
In the middle of that chaos, a 20mm cannon shell exploded nearby. Shrapnel tore into his arm and his shoulder, and it jammed his left-hand gun. So now he's bleeding, he's only got one working machine gun, and he just keeps firing, one-handed, defending his crew. Unbelievable. A little over a month later, it happens again, this time on a deep raid to Stuttgart. Enemy contact starts early. By 10:30, Arth is wounded again, and his left gun is completely destroyed. But he keeps fighting. His bomber, the Tondileo, gets so shot up they can't make it back to base. They end up ditching him the English Channel. But, and this is the key part, Because of his defense, all 10 crewmen survived.
Okay, so Aruth had now survived some of the war's absolute toughest missions. And not only that, his crazy, unorthodox methods were getting results. Word started to get around. And pretty soon, the high command, the guys who usually hate rule breakers, they had no choice but to start looking at the evidence.
And the proof was just undeniable. First, they had gun camera footage that showed his tracers disrupting attacks from way out. Then, other gunners in his squadron started trying it, and they started surviving more too. Before long, a formal analysis by the 8th Air Force confirmed it all. The hard data backed up the Maverick gunner.
And the difference was just stark. You could literally see it. Bombers that were protected by gunners following the old passive rulebook, they were getting hit. But the bombers protected by gunners using Aruth's aggressive, disruptive fire, they were coming home.
And then came the ultimate validation. In November of 1943, the Army Air Force officially changed the gunnery manual. Engaging the enemy at long range was no longer reckless, it was now official policy. That one man in that one plexiglass bubble had rewritten the rules for the entire Air Force.
So what happened to this quiet hero? The guy who stared down not just the Luftwaffe, but his own commanders, all to save countless lives?
Well, by the time his injuries finally grounded him for good, Michael Arth was credited with 17 confirmed kills. That's an incredible number that made him one of the highest-scoring bomber gunners of the entire war. But his contribution didn't stop there, not by a long shot. He spent the rest of the war as an instructor, teaching thousands of new gunners the exact life-saving techniques that he had forged in the heat of combat. So his one single insight was now being multiplied across the entire force.
And what's really interesting is that after the war, he didn't just walk away. He stayed in the Air Force for another 15 years. For him, the service had given him this profound sense of purpose, and he felt like he had a duty to keep serving. He really was a quiet professional, right to the very end. Michael Arth's story really leaves us with this powerful question, doesn't it? He broke the rules, he disobeyed the manual, people called him reckless, but he did it because the rules were flawed and his gut instinct was right. And it really makes you wonder, when is challenging the system not just an option, but your actual responsibility?